I think Yu-Gi-Oh's in a good place right now. I think it's only getting better, and I think there's plenty of fruit for everyone to pick from the tree.
And then Link Summoning came out. What's going on, guys? It's Cimoooooooo. Now, today I'm bringing to you a video discussing Link Summoning, a brief overview of Link Summoning, and then finally my thoughts on the Link Summoning mechanic as a whole. So, the funniest part about this whole thing is I was actually at the airport when they announced all the news about Link Summoning, so I was kind of ranting on Twitter, kind of just a little stream of consciousness discussing my thoughts about it, but now I wanted to bring you a full discussion video on the mechanic itself. So if you're completely unaware of what the hell I'm talking about, Link Summoning is a brand new summoning mechanic that's going to be coming to Yu-Gi-Oh! It's going to be released in Japan rather shortly, which means in America we'll probably be getting it probably towards the latter end of summer or maybe in the fall of 2017. Now, Link Summoning is an entire mechanic. It also has Link monsters, which are defined by a blue colored card border. Now, to quickly go over the Link monsters, I'm going to throw one up on the screen here, and I'm going to kind of discuss the details of Link monsters. So what makes Link monsters unique is that, very similar to things like Fusion, Synchro, or Xyz monsters, they have material requirements in order to make them. Now, this is defined in the instance of Decode Talker here. You've probably seen this monster all over the place already. Decode Talker requires 3 effect monsters to Link summon, and you would send those monsters to the graveyard and summon out Decode Talker. The second way you can actually summon him, though, you'll notice in the bottom right corner, instead of defense points, you'll actually see the word Link and a number following. So you can, for the most part, you can either do the normal summoning method of summoning the Link monster, or if you have a Link monster that is one number lower than the Link monster that you're attempting to summon, you can actually use that Link monster. In this instance, it would be a Link 2 monster plus an effect monster to be able to summon the Link 3 monster, Decode Talker. So you have several different ways of being able to summon these monsters out. Now, I did mention that there are no defense points, instead, because of the Link number being in the defense point slot of the card, and that's because these cards don't have any defense points. They can't actually even be switched to defense mode, whether it's by, wanting to switch from attack to defense, or even by game mechanics. So something like Book of Moon, or a card effect that would switch a monster to defense mode. Link monsters just can't go to defense mode, which I find really hilarious because we're in such a very fast, aggressive format. Defense has never really been like the highest priority on anyone's list, so now they pretty much did away with defense points altogether. Another very interesting thing about Link monsters is that they don't have levels, and why that's important is because that means you can't actually use them for Synchro or Xyz summoning in attempts to do like any ridiculous crazy combos. And I think that was intentional, because if that was the case, I mean, granted it would open up the window to just so many different possibilities of plays, but I also don't think they wanted to make things any more complicated or ridiculously broken, I guess for that matter, than they already are. And last but not least, pretty much the most important aspect about the Link monsters is their Link indicators. Now, you can see on Decode Talker here, Decode Talker has 3 highlighted arrows of 9. There's an arrow pointing in each of the cardinal directions. That actually would be 8. I don't know why I'm thinking 9, but anyway, so in each of the 8 cardinal directions, and this actually indicates monsters that can actually continue to be special summoned from the extra deck, and it also applies for Link mechanic effects as well. So what do I mean by special summoning from the extra deck? Well, the thing is, alongside with Link monsters and Link summoning, there has actually been an entire change to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Game board as a whole, and that is the inclusion of 2 extra deck monster slots rather, that are now above the 2nd and 4th main deck monster zones. And I'll show a picture to illustrate this as well. Basically, what this means is that if you want to summon a monster from the extra deck, there is now a dedicated slot where you have to do that, whereas the typical 5 monster zones that we've had since this game's inception are now main monster zones. So that means that you can actually only summon 1 extra deck monster right out of the gate, at least until the Link monsters come in. Now, those arrows I alluded to earlier, or those indicators rather, the arrows point at at separate zones. And in the case of Decode Talker is pointing to the zones on its left and right side. Now, when you have a Link monster in your extra deck monster zone, you now have those slots that now turn into extra deck monster zones. So now you went from having one extra deck monster zone to two in the case of Decode Talker. And so you really want to pay attention to these Link monsters to be sure you know how many extra deck monster zones you have available to you at any given point, because it actually is going to make a very big difference in your ability to, to be able to special summon spam stuff out of the extra deck. Now, I did also mention that Link monsters have specific effects in regards to their activation markers or their Link markers. So in the case of Decode Talker, it gains 500 attack for each monster that's linked to it. And since there's 3 markers, that means that Decode Talker's attack can potentially be 3,800 because it's pointing to 2 of your own zones and then 1 of your opponent's. And then also it has the ability that it can negate a card effect by getting rid of 1 of the monsters that it's linked to, so that's a really cool effect as well. But one thing I want to mention is that, especially in the case of Decode Talker, it is pointing towards 1 of your opponent's monster zones, and that means that if you summon Decode Talker on turn 1, your opponent actually now has access to 2 extra deck zones because they have the extra deck monster zone that is currently unoccupied, and then they also have the extra deck monster zone that your Decode Talker is pointing towards. So that's something you really want to keep in mind when playing these Link monsters, because you might just entirely give your opponent the ability to out your board by giving them that extra monster deck or extra monster zone without even really thinking about the consequences of doing so. So that pretty much rounds out about everything in regards to Link summoning and the Link monsters as a whole. It's very interesting, I would have to say, all around, because that means that with the way that these cards are designed, hypothetically, Konami could now design a Link monster that is absurdly broken. Like, it could have just some of the craziest of effects that we've ever seen in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, but then they could give it 3 activation markers or Link markers on the top 3 slots pointing towards your opponent's 3 zones, which means that your opponent now has 4 extra deck monster zones available at their disposal to help counteract this insane Link monster that's being released. So they have a lot of very interesting applications now in terms of card design and what this is and the freedom this is going to allow them to do in terms of playing with this mechanic. And it's really cool as well because you can summon a Link monster, open up a couple more zones, and then if you have the ability to summon another Link monster in one of those new zones unlocked by your first Link monster, then you're going to have like a total of 3 zones at your extra deck disposal that are opened up, or, all the other shenanigans that the Link monsters may have in terms of their own built-in effects. So there's a lot of crazy shit going on here, and it's a little bit confusing at first, but, once you start kind of understanding it all as a whole, it pretty much starts to all boil down and make a lot of sense. I know in the beginning people were speculating about a ton of different things, but now I think we have all the information solidified, and we're at a state that we can now, discuss it cohesively, really understanding all the information that we now have. But moving forward now, I want to discuss my thoughts about why I absolutely hate this idea and why I absolutely love it. So starting with why I hate it. The biggest reason why I hate the Link summoning mechanic is that it prohibits and limits your ability in terms of card choice, deck building, and deck design. Now let me explain. When the Synchro mechanic, Xyz mechanic, and Pendulum mechanics have all been released, they never exactly limited your ability to play certain cards, certain archetypes, different things like that. People still had the creative freedom to play how they wanted to play. When Synchro or Xyz was released, you didn't have to necessarily play a deck that used those summoning mechanics. You could have just still played like a Synchro deck in an Xyz format, and that's totally all well and good. But the problem is now with Link summoning, I feel that Link summoning and the Link mechanic as a whole forces you to play this mechanic and pretty much cripples a ton of different decks that are reliant on the extra deck in order for themselves to function. These decks like Dark Synchro, Burning Abyss, and so people are going to still find ways to play these decks, but in terms of like what the deck was meant to do or what it's done for so long, it pretty much destroys that deck's ability to continue playing that way, because now that there's only one extra deck monster zone, unless you're playing Link monsters to unlock more zones for yourself, you know, you can't summon like 2 Dantes, a Levier, and a Breaksword in a Burning Abyss Phantom Knight deck. You know, you can't summon triple Psyframe Lord Omega unless you find a way to get a Link monster out first that unlocks more of your zones. So I really don't like that it limits your ability to deck build and, you know, choose cards that can make your deck a lot better because of the way the mechanic is designed. But on that note, and on the flip side of that coin, what I really love about this is how it's going to change the game. You know, there are so many different decks now that are viable that weren't previously viable because the game has just gotten to a point where it's so fast that power creep is taking over so many different decks and archetypes that they're just getting completely outclassed and have zero chance in the meta anyway. But now with Link summoning, you know, sure, Zodiac is still going to be playable because people have already figured out how to do the main Zodiac combo utilizing Link summoning. But there's all these other slow decks now that, especially these slow decks that don't rely on the extra deck, decks like Water, decks like Blue Eyes, Infernoid even, that are actually, I guess Infernoid's really relevant now, but like Water and Blue Eyes more specifically, that are really going to get a bump up from the Link mechanic being implemented, because now these strategies that don't rely on the extra deck, you know, seldom at all, are going to be able to dominate because they don't need to worry about this mechanic. So, you know, you're going to have all these old decks being revitalized, and people are going to come up with new strategies with the Link mechanic as well, but then you're still going to have your decks like Zodiac and all these other decks like ABC that people are still going to figure out how to play, that are still incredibly strong, and that you're still going to see on the competitive level. So overall, I do think that this is for the better of the game, because it's really going to inspire much more, you know, deck choice and deck diversity in the format, because there's going to be so many options that weren't previously available that are now going to be introduced, at least until we get some new crazy generic support for Link monsters, because with every mechanic and summoning monster like, you know, like Link summoning, Xyz, Synchro, anything like that, we'll usually get some broken support, or they're going to come up with some crazy broken, like, Link Zero monster that can just be immediately summoned from the extra deck, and it's just going to completely break the game. But those are just my thoughts, you guys. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about the Link summoning mechanic as a whole. I'd really love to hear your thoughts on this and get some discussion going, because this is Yu-Gi-Oh! Moving forward once we get these monsters, so it's going to be a big change for the game, but ultimately, I think it's for the better. So thank you guys so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content, and also be sure to back me on Patreon, because just by pledging $1 a month, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh! Content. So thanks so much again. We'll see you next time.